It was a quiet autumn evening in the small town of Rosefield, the kind of place where nothing ever really happened. Rows of maple trees lined the streets, their orange and gold leaves fluttering gently to the ground. The townspeople were preparing. For Halloween, storefronts were decorated with pumpkins, paper ghosts hung from porches, and children talked excitedly about costumes and candy. It was a peaceful town, safe and familiar. The kind of place where children could play outside until the sun dipped low behind the hills. That's what Morgan and Tally were doing on the last day anyone saw them alive. Morgan, a cheerful 8-year-old, with curly brown hair and freckles across her nose, was inseparable from her best friend Tally, a quiet girl who loved sketching animals and collecting smooth stones from the creek. They had grown up 2 streets apart and spent every afternoon together after school. That evening, they had gotten permission from their parents to ride their bikes to a nearby field just behind Rosefield Elementary. It wasn't far, only a 10-minute ride through a patch of woods, a place the kids called the shortcut. They never came back. At first, no one panicked. It wasn't unusual for Morgan and Tally to lose track of time, especially if they found a rabbit burrow or spotted a deer in the woods. Their parents called each other, expecting the girls to be at one, home or the other. But as the minutes passed and the sun dipped below the treetops, concern turned to worry, and worry turned to fear. Flashlights flickered on, voices called their names, and parents wandered into the darkening woods with increasing urgency. By midnight, the police were involved. A full-scale search began before sunrise. Volunteers gathered at the school, some still in their pajamas, ready to comb every inch of the woods. Helicopters hovered overhead while search dogs were brought in from the next county. Dozens of officers, rangers, and locals worked through the rain-soaked forest, calling out the girls' names, but nothing turned up. On the 3rd day, they found something, a bike. It was Tally's. It was lying on its side near the old abandoned cabin that had stood empty for years. The front wheel was bent, and the chain hung loose. Her backpack was nearby, unzipped, with a few colored pencils scattered in the dirt. But there was no sign of Tally herself, and Morgan's bike was missing entirely. The cabin was searched from top to bottom. Dust covered every surface. There were spider webs in the corners and signs that animals had nested inside. But nothing concrete connected it to the girls. Still, the area was considered the last known location of Tally, and the search radius was expanded. A week later, the breakthrough no one wanted came. Tally's body was discovered by a park ranger during a patrol. She had been buried beneath a thin layer of leaves and soil in a shallow grave just a mile from the cabin. Her clothes were torn, and her body showed signs of struggle, but the cause of death was never made public. The town mourned in silence, shaken to its core. A memorial service was held at the community center, where children cried and adults stood helpless. Tally's parents could barely speak. Morgan's parents, sitting in the front row, were pale with grief, but still held onto a thread of hope. Morgan's body was never found. No new evidence surfaced. After several weeks, the case began to fade from the headlines. The story of 2 best friends, the bikes, the woods, the shallow grave, was still whispered about in classrooms and church halls. Parents became more cautious, locking doors earlier, keeping their kids inside. But with no answers, fear turned into quiet acceptance. The police called it an open investigation. Posters with Morgan's face remained taped to telephone poles and gas station windows. Her smile, wide, innocent, and missing one front tooth, haunted everyone who saw it. The words, "Have you seen me?" faded in the sun and rain until they were barely legible. Some believed Morgan had been taken and murdered the same day as Tali. Others thought she had been kidnapped and kept alive.
Conspiracy theories popped up on online forums, with amateur sleuths offering timelines and wild guesses. Some claimed Morgan had run away. Others said they saw her in different states, riding buses, hiding in churches. None of the leads led
anywhere. The woods where the girls vanished grew quieter. Fewer kids played near the tree line. Hunters avoided the area. The old cabin was eventually boarded up and marked with yellow tape, but no one went near it. Even animals seemed to avoid the place. It became a silent monument to something terrible, an open wound in Rosefield's memory. 3 years passed. Morgan's room remained untouched. Her parents couldn't bring themselves to change anything. Her toys stayed where she had last played with them. Her clothes still hung in the closet, and her favorite stuffed bear sat on her neatly made bed. Her mother left the porch light on, every night, just in case Morgan found her way home. The case faded into cold files in the back room of the local precinct. A new school year started. Halloween decorations went up again, and life slowly returned to a new version of normal. But beneath the surface, a darkness lingered. People still remembered. Children still asked about the girls who disappeared. And then, without warning, something strange happened. Something that would change everything. One afternoon, a woman no one recognized walked into the Rosefield Police Department. She wasn't from the town, and her clothes looked worn. She seemed nervous but determined. She told the officers she had information about the missing girl, Morgan. She said she'd seen her, not alive, but in dreams. The officers were polite, but dismissive. They had heard things like this before. Psychics, false memories, people looking for attention. But this woman wasn't like the others. She had names, locations, and details she shouldn't have known. And when she spoke of the place where Tali had been buried, the exact tree, the shape of the clearing, the color of the leaves on that day, something about her words chilled even the most hardened officer in the room. Her name was Robin, and she had just reopened the case that everyone had quietly given up on, because Morgan, the little girl who had vanished 3 years ago, wasn't done yet. Robin was not a name anyone in Rosefield recognized. She came from out of town, a woman in her late 30s with no connection to the victims, the school, or the area. Yet she arrived at the police department with urgency in her eyes and a strange calm in her voice. She didn't demand attention. She didn't make a scene. She simply asked to speak with someone in charge, explaining quietly that she had information about a girl who had disappeared years ago. Morgan. Most officers were used to odd claims. In cold cases like Morgan's, the years dragged in all kinds of strange people. Some claimed psychic powers. Others had dreams they thought were messages. Most were ignored, but Robin was different. She didn't act like someone desperate for attention. She brought no theatrics. Her story was focused, specific, and disturbingly accurate. She said she'd been having dreams, vivid, recurring ones, always the same. A child crying, a dark room, chains, the smell of mildew, the sound of dripping water, and then a voice. Not a whisper, but not quite a scream either. A voice asking for help. A voice calling out the name Tali. The officers who listened wrote down her claims, expecting them to lead nowhere. But as she continued, Robin began to describe places, real places, deep within the woods behind. Rosefield. Places the search teams had passed over or never reached. She spoke of a rusted fence wrapped in vines, a hollow tree with a symbol carved into the bark, a concrete block covered in moss near a stream. One detective, Michael Briggs, paused. The symbol Robin described, a triangle with a broken line through it, was something found carved into a tree near the area where Tali's body had been discovered. That detail had never been released to the public. Robin had never been to Rosefield before. She had no friends or relatives there. Yet she described the forest trails in chilling detail, as if she had walked them herself. When asked how she knew these things, Robin simply said she didn't know. The images just came. She hadn't followed the case. She hadn't seen any documentaries or news reports. She claimed she didn't even know Morgan's name until the dream started. Still skeptical but uneasy, Detective Briggs decided to follow up. He asked Robin to guide them to the locations from her visions. They drove deep into the woods, past the school, beyond the original search perimeter, until Robin asked them to stop. She stepped out of the car, walked 20 yards off the trail, and pointed to a collapsed wooden structure buried under brush and fallen branches. Beneath it, they found something, small fragments of bone. A shoe, rusted chains. The shoe was pink, with fading white stars and the initials MW written on the insole in a child's handwriting. Morgan's mother later confirmed it had been her daughter's favorite pair. It was enough to reopen the case officially. A new search team was deployed. Cadaver dogs were brought back in. Forensic specialists combed through every inch of the new site. Soil samples were taken. Old foundations were scanned. The basement of the collapsed structure was excavated. Inside, they found traces of dried blood in the concrete cracks. Human. Hair was tangled in a nail jutting from the wall. Even after all those years, the DNA matched Morgan's. Robin had just led the police to the most significant clue in the entire investigation. But she wasn't done. Over the following days, Robin began to experience what she called episodes. She would fall silent, then begin describing places and events as though she were there. She spoke in a childlike tone, described moments of fear and cold, hunger and loneliness. These weren't guesses, they were memories, and not hers. Doctors. I couldn't explain it. Psychologists thought it could be dissociative identity disorder or trauma-induced hallucinations, but none of it made sense. Robin had no history of mental illness. She had lived an ordinary life working as a nurse's assistant in a city hospital hours away. She'd never been in trouble, never shown signs of delusion. But now she was acting like someone else, someone who remembered being locked away, someone who remembered the screams of another little girl, someone who remembered dying. Police tried to keep it quiet, but word got out. The town buzzed with rumors. Some called Robin a fraud, others believed she had been sent by Morgan's spirit to reveal the truth. Local media called her the medium of Rosefield, though Robin herself denied being psychic. She didn't want fame. She didn't want attention. She wanted the dreams to stop, and the dreams kept coming. She led authorities to a narrow ravine 10 miles from the farmhouse. At the bottom, they found scattered bones belonging to a third child. The body had never been reported missing. Through DNA analysis and dental records, the girl was later identified as a foster child who had gone off the radar years earlier in another county. Her case had been misfiled and forgotten. Robin knew her name. She also knew how she died. Each discovery made the investigators more nervous. If Robin wasn't the killer, how could she possibly know this much? They began to consider something darker, something impossible. Could Morgan have returned in some form? Had her consciousness somehow merged with this stranger? More sites were uncovered. Remnants of crude holding cells, rope, cloth, scraps of children's clothes. The pattern was undeniable. A method was emerging. A predator had been active for years, hidden in the silence of the woods just beyond reach. Robin was the key, and she was unraveling. She stopped sleeping. She refused food. She would sit for hours in silence, eyes wide open, whispering phrases that matched words from Morgan's school journals, words only her family would recognize. One night, Robin collapsed. She was rushed to the hospital. During her brief unconsciousness, she uttered something that sent chills through every officer on the case. She said the name of the killer, first name, last name. No hesitation. A name that belonged to a man still living in Rosefield. A man with no criminal record. A man who had been interviewed during the original investigation and dismissed entirely. His name was Daniel Lorne, and he was about to become the center of one of the most terrifying criminal cases the town, or the nation, had ever seen. Daniel Lorne was the kind of man no one suspected. He had lived in Rosefield for more than 20 years, owned a small hardware store on Main Street, and volunteered at local events. He was polite, well-spoken, and known for handing out free candy to children during Halloween. People trusted him. They smiled when he walked past. He lived alone in a modest house on the edge of town, surrounded by thick woods and a broken-down greenhouse that hadn't grown anything in years. When Robin named him, the officers didn't want to believe it. Detective Briggs was especially reluctant. Daniel had been among the many townspeople who had assisted in the original search for Morgan and Tally. He had even organized flashlight patrols through the woods. His name had appeared once in the early investigation logs, not as a suspect but as a volunteer. No criminal history, no known complaints, just a man who appeared concerned for his community. But now the name had resurfaced, unexpectedly, terrifyingly, from the lips of a woman who had somehow uncovered truths buried in the earth. Her statement couldn't be ignored. Detectives reopened the original interview files. They reviewed Daniel's alibi for the day the girls vanished. He claimed to have been at his store all day, managing deliveries and assisting customers. It sounded solid at the time, and it had gone unchallenged. But when they checked the records again, something stood out. The security camera outside Daniel's store had been malfunctioning that week. No footage from the day in question was available. And the delivery driver who supposedly dropped off supplies couldn't be located. His signature on the receipt looked odd, like it had been traced or forged. Investigators quietly placed Daniel under surveillance. He went about his life without a hint of worry. He opened the store at 9 a.m., closed it at 6, and spent most evenings at home. But his calmness only made them more uneasy. They needed more than intuition. They needed proof. That proof came, once, again, from Robin. After recovering in the hospital, she described a cellar. Damp, narrow, with a floor made of packed earth and walls of thick stone. She spoke of a red door with peeling paint and a broken handle. She described the smell of kerosene and mildew, and a series of objects, children's shoes, a metal bucket, and a worn-out stuffed rabbit with one eye missing. She said the rabbit belonged to Morgan, armed with a warrant and accompanied by a forensic team. The police arrived at Daniel Lorne's home early one morning. He didn't resist. In fact, he appeared confused and quietly compliant, inviting them in without hesitation. His house was clean and simple, nothing strange on the surface. But out back, behind the greenhouse, investigators discovered a locked storm cellar, almost invisible beneath layers of overgrowth. The door matched Robin's description exactly. They broke the lock and descended into the darkness. The air was thick and musty. A single light bulb flickered above. And there it was. The rabbit, just as Robin described, lying beside a rusted metal bucket. Shoes were stacked along one wall. Children's clothing, scraps of blankets, all decaying. With time, but unmistakably real. In one corner they found a small mattress covered in plastic. Beneath it, the concrete had been dug up and filled in again. Forensic teams would later confirm it had been used to bury remains before being moved. The cellar wasn't a simple hiding place. It was a prison. Daniel was arrested on the spot. He didn't protest. He didn't ask why. He simply looked down at the floor and sighed. It was that moment, that soft, eerie surrender, that convinced Detective Briggs this wasn't a case of mistaken identity. At the station, Daniel refused to speak without a lawyer, but when asked about the cellar, he admitted to building it years ago. He claimed it had once been used for storing tools and chemicals for his greenhouse. He said he hadn't used it in years. But his fingerprints were on nearly every surface. DNA testing confirmed what everyone feared. Traces from 3 separate children were recovered. 2 matched known victims, Morgan and the previously unidentified girl found in the ravine. The 3rd was still pending. But even without a full match, the evidence was overwhelming. The town reacted with disbelief. News vans parked outside Daniel's home. Neighbors gave interviews, describing him as quiet and helpful. Some cried. Some couldn't speak. Parents hugged their children tighter. Storefronts removed Halloween decorations. The entire community felt betrayed. As the investigation expanded, more horrifying discoveries came to light. Hidden behind a false wall in Daniel's attic, officers found notebooks, dozens of them. Pages filled with drawings, maps, and timelines. Each book documented a different child, names, routines, favorite places, vulnerabilities. He had been watching them for years. Some names matched missing persons from other counties. It became clear that Daniel wasn't just involved in the disappearance of Morgan and Tally. He was a serial predator, a planner, a stalker who hunted without ever drawing attention. And he had operated undetected for over a decade. But the strangest piece of the puzzle remained Robin. She had no connection to Daniel. She had never met him, never stepped foot in Rosefield before. Yet she had led police directly to his hidden world. Psychologists studied her. Some called it a rare case of recovered ancestral memory. Others believed in a psychological bond between trauma survivors. But none of it explained the precision of her knowledge. Robin, exhausted and pale, began to deteriorate mentally and physically. She spoke less and less, staring at walls for hours. When asked how she felt about Daniel's arrest, she simply said, "She can rest now." Detective Briggs came to believe. Something far beyond understanding had occurred. A haunting, a possession, or perhaps a final act of love from a child who refused to stay silent. Morgan's body was never found, but her presence was undeniable. Through Robin, she had spoken, revealed, and guided. In death, she had brought down the man who silenced so many others, and though the town would never be the same again, one truth echoed through the streets, in whispers and tears. Morgan hadn't just vanished. She had fought back. Daniel Lorne's trial was scheduled only months after his arrest, but the town of Rosefield felt like it was suspended in time. The silence was thick, uncomfortable. Families who had once trusted the man now avoided even saying his name. His hardware store was boarded up, the windows covered with plywood. Graffiti scrawled across the door read, "Monster." People crossed the street to avoid walking past it. The community was still trying to accept that a predator had lived among them, camouflaged as a helpful neighbor. Inside the courtroom, the mood was heavier. The prosecution had built a damning case, lined with forensic evidence, recovered items, and DNA that left little doubt about Daniel's guilt. The cellar, the notebooks, the remains. They were all impossible to explain away. But it was Robin's testimony that the world waited to hear, not because it was traditional evidence, but because it was impossible to ignore. Robin hadn't returned to her old life. She couldn't. After Daniel's arrest, she stayed in a secure facility under medical care. She had no history of trauma, but her body was breaking down. She experienced frequent blackouts. Her heart rate spiked without reason. Some doctors whispered about psychological stress. Others said it was something beyond medicine. She often murmured names in her sleep. Names that hadn't been part of the case files but were later cross-referenced and found to belong to other missing children from neighboring counties. It was as though her body was still channeling pieces of lives that had been stolen. Despite her fragile condition, Robin agreed to testify. Her appearance shocked the courtroom. Her once clear eyes were dull, rimmed with exhaustion. She was led to the stand slowly, each step shaky, as if she carried not just her own weight, but the weight of every child Daniel had ever harmed. She didn't speak with emotion. There were no theatrics, no attempts at dramatization. Robin simply answered questions with unnerving clarity. She described the cellar, the items found there, and her visions. She recalled places where Morgan had been taken, feelings she had no personal memory of but recounted as if they had been her own, feelings of hunger, fear, abandonment, and the overwhelming presence of someone watching from the shadows. The defense attempted to discredit her. They labeled her a delusional woman seeking attention, someone prone to fantasy and suggestion. They brought in a psychiatrist who tried to argue that Robin's memories were manufactured by exposure to media and public records. But none of that explained how she knew the location of the farmhouse, how she led detectives to remains, how she described the stuffed rabbit, the symbols in the woods, the names of other children. None of it explained how she identified Daniel by name, before he was even on the radar. The jury listened. Carefully, quietly. Many were visibly shaken. As the trial progressed, more chilling details came to light. The journals found in Daniel's attic revealed patterns in his behavior. He studied his targets for months. He cataloged their schedules, weaknesses, family structures. He often referred to them not by name, but by number. Morgan was subject 9, Tolly was 10. The unidentified girl in the ravine was 7. He had been doing this longer than anyone realized. More missing children cases were reopened. Some dated back nearly 15 years. Other counties joined the investigation. Slowly, a larger, horrifying picture began to form. Daniel wasn't just a local threat. He had traveled, sometimes for work, sometimes simply to disappear into towns for weeks at a time, hunting. In his basement, investigators found keepsakes, broken hair ties, colored pencils, scraps of schoolwork. Each item was now a clue to someone's vanished child. Each was a heartbreak waiting to be identified. And yet, Daniel never confessed. Not once. Not even after the evidence buried him. He sat through the trial blank-faced, rarely blinking, occasionally glancing at the floor, never at the victims' families. His silence became another form of cruelty. But the final blow didn't come from the prosecution. It came from Robin, though not through words. During the last week of the trial, she collapsed again. Doctors rushed her to the hospital, fearing organ failure. She was placed under sedation, monitored around the clock. But something extraordinary happened during that time. Security footage captured Robin, unconscious in her hospital bed, suddenly lifting her hand to the air and tracing a pattern with her finger. It was the same symbol carved into trees near where the bodies were found, the triangle with the broken line. Nurses watching the footage said the air in the room grew cold. Medical monitors spiked and then fell still. Robin's heart stopped. She was revived within minutes, but when she regained consciousness, she whispered something no one expected. Coordinates. The coordinates pointed to a remote stretch of land just outside the state border. Law enforcement followed the tip. Buried beneath a rotting doghouse behind an abandoned cabin, they uncovered a metal box. Inside were the remains of another child, a girl missing for over a decade. Her name was Elena, and her case had never been connected to Daniel until now. The news broke across the country. Robin had once again led authorities to another victim. Her connection to the dead, whether spiritual, psychological, or something else entirely, was undeniable. No one could explain it, but no one could deny its truth. The jury delivered its verdict after 2 days of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. Multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. Daniel showed no emotion, no regret, no anger. Just that same eerie stillness, as though his conviction didn't matter, as though he had never considered freedom to begin with. Robin wasn't present in the courtroom when the verdict was read. Her health had continued to decline. Doctors had no clear answers. She had become a mystery herself, haunted, hollowed out by something unseen. But she had done what no one else could. She had brought justice for Morgan, for Tali, for Elena, and likely for many others who would never have been found. The people of Rosefield mourned their lost children. They held candlelight vigils and read the names aloud, but they also remembered the woman who carried their voices, the stranger who had given everything to speak for the dead. And as the sun set on the day of the verdict, a breeze rolled through the trees behind the old farmhouse. Leaves rustled, and the woods stood quiet. Finally, perhaps, at peace. After the verdict, Rosefield entered a new kind of silence. The loud horror had passed. The news vans rolled away. The courthouse emptied. The police tape removed, but what lingered was heavier. It was a quiet grief, a town-wide ache that had no outlet. For a while, no one spoke of Daniel Lorne. People didn't even mention his name. They didn't want to remember the man who had disguised evil beneath friendliness and small talk. But forgetting wasn't possible. Too much had been lost. Morgan's parents never fully returned to their old lives. They kept her bedroom untouched, the window open just slightly, as if waiting for her return. Every birthday, they placed a single candle in the window and let it burn until dawn. They had no grave to visit, no ashes to bury, just the memory of a girl who had been stolen and whose voice had somehow broken through from beyond. Robin, the woman who had become the vessel of that voice, was still in the hospital. Doctors kept her under observation, baffled by her declining condition. They ran test after test, but her body told a story no medical chart could explain. She ate less, slept less, and spoke only in fragments. Often she would stare into corners of the room and whisper names of children no one else knew. When investigators looked into them, some turned out to be real, cases filed in distant towns, long considered cold. They no longer questioned how Robin knew. They just listened. Detective Briggs visited her often. He had been the one to doubt her in the beginning, and he felt a deep responsibility for her now. On one visit, he brought her a small music box that had belonged to Morgan. When he placed it on the table beside her, Robin reached out, touched it gently, and whispered. She liked the ballerina inside. But the music box had no ballerina. It had broken years ago, something only Morgan's mother had ever known. That moment was the last time Robin spoke clearly. Not long after, she slipped into a coma. Doctors could find no trauma, no cause. It was as if something had simply left. The medical term they used was unresponsive consciousness. But those who knew what she had done, who she had helped, believed it was something far more sacred. Outside, Rosefield slowly started to heal. The cellar behind Daniel's house was destroyed. The land was cleared, the greenhouse raised. Nothing was built there again. Nature was allowed to reclaim it. People said that at night, if you stood near the edge of the woods, you could hear children laughing. Not the eerie kind, but light and free, as if their pain had been lifted. A memorial was erected in the center of town. It featured no names, just a statue of a girl with a lantern facing the forest. At her feet were carvings of small shoes and teddy bears. The plaque read, "For those who were taken, and for the voice who led them home." Years passed, but the story never fully disappeared. Books were written, documentaries filmed. Scientists debated the impossible link between Robin and the dead. Psychics claimed to understand her connection, but no one could replicate what she had done. Her gift, or curse, was unique. Then, one morning, the hospital nurse assigned to Robin entered her room and stopped. Robin was awake, her eyes open, calm, her body weak but steady. She didn't ask where she was or how much time had passed. She simply said, "They're quiet now." She was released from the hospital weeks later. She didn't return to her old job, her old apartment, or her old name. She changed everything and moved to a quiet coastal town, where she lived in a small cottage and rarely spoke to anyone. But occasionally she sent anonymous letters to families of missing children. Inside were directions, sketches, or a name. And more often than not, those families found answers they'd been waiting decades for. Detective Briggs retired soon after. He left Rosefield and wrote a memoir about the case, not for fame, but for truth. In it, he described his regret for not listening sooner, his struggle with the unexplainable, and his belief that some justice comes from places we can't understand. As for Daniel Lorne, he remained silent in prison. He refused all visitors, even his court-appointed attorney. But guards reported strange behavior. Sometimes, late at night, he would scream as if voices surrounded him. He would wake up soaked in sweat, claiming they were in the room. Eventually, he stopped sleeping altogether. One morning he was found dead in his cell, No signs of trauma, no suicide. The cause was officially listed as cardiac arrest, but the look on his face was described as wide-eyed terror. The autopsy revealed something strange. In his clenched hand was a small scrap of paper. On it, drawn in faint pencil, was a triangle with a broken line. The same symbol that had haunted the woods, the same one Robin had drawn unconsciously. After Daniel's death, new cases stopped surfacing. Robin no longer whispered names in her sleep. The letters stopped arriving. The town of Rosefield returned to a quiet existence. Children played in the streets again. Windows opened. Halloween decorations came back. But beneath it all was a sense of gratitude and reverence. Morgan's story became a legend, not just of a girl who vanished, but of a child who refused to be forgotten. A girl whose spirit fought back, whose voice echoed through a stranger, and who, even in death, brought evil to light. Robin's story, too, became something more than fact. People disagreed on what to call it: possession, spiritual justice, a miracle. But no one could deny what she had done. She was the bridge between silence and truth, the unlikely hero whose body bore the weight of others' pain. And though her face faded from the public eye, her presence remained in whispers, in prayers, in the quiet moments when a mother stared out a window, waiting. Because somewhere deep down, people believed that if another child were ever taken, somehow, some way, Robin would hear, and she would come.